Will the heavy rain and snowfall in California replenish groundwater, reservoirs, and lakes? Meade. I know the reservoirs will fill quickly, but recalling the pictures of Lake Meade's water lines makes me curious if one heavy season is enough to restore the lakes and groundwater. How much water will it take to return to normal levels, if not?
There's talk about allowing parts of California's Central Valley farmland to flood each winter, which was a normal occurrence prior to modern flood control. The purpose would be to replenish the groundwater, which has been severely of the reservoirs in California are now above their historical average and set to reach full capacity as the snow melts. Lake Meade, sadly, has not been helped. All that is an interactive summary of several ca. reservoirs. You can adjust the date to September 1st to see what it looked like before the rainy season. The calendar is on the upper right. The default view is the most is still pretty low because it is mostly replenished by snowmelt rather than rain. Lake Oroville and Lake Shasta are two large reservoirs that improved remarkably in one rainy is a cool animation that shows how the year went so.
In the case of Lake Meade specifically, the water needs to fall within the Colorado River Basin, upstream of the Hoover Dam, in order to make it into the lake. The rains have been happening in Northern California, and west of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Rain did not make it to Lake Meade. You'd probably be hearing of floods in southern Utah and northern Arizona, or possibly heavy snow in western Colorado. To have any chance of Lake Meade getting it did make it to Hetch Hetchy. So that's good news for San Franciscans. And plenty of other smaller reservoirs on the west side of the Sierra Rainshadow have also received plenty of rain.
The rain, snow ends the drought for the soil and the reservoirs, but groundwater takes much longer to recharge, and we have to actually stop making net withdrawals from ground aquifers for that to happen. I forget if we've at least returned to neutral on that. Definitely not before 2014 legislation kicked in.
Yes and no. Yes, it will replenish some groundwater. No, it won't fix the problem. It is useful to talk about the problem in terms of analogy. Imagine we are talking about money. The money we have in our wallet is what rains and falls on the ground. In many places that would mean some days we have more than enough and other days not enough. Every few days, if you have too much money in your wallet, then you have to give it away. It would be hard to live out of your smart, and we engineered reservoirs to store some of the water. We know how much is in the reservoir, so we can manage it pretty well. The volume they store isn't enough and they can't go everywhere, so they aren't a perfect solution. This is like a checking account, and if you put too much money in it you get weird fees. Also, you are limited in how you can spend the money. Does the person accept checks? What about groundwater in aquifers? Nature provided us with an enormous volume of water deposited over a span of decades to thousands of years in places. However, we usually have the dimmest idea of the actual volume of water in storage. I say aquifers, plural, because in most places it is important to realize we aren't talking about one giant aquifer. Let's think of these as countless savings accounts provided to us by our lovely and kind grandma when we turned 18. Not everyone gets a nice savings account. Did we think to ask what the balance was? Nobody did back in 1900 when we started using it. Did we try to find out when we purchased a car? Nope. And when we went off to college or tried buying a house? Right now, after more than 100 years of operating like this, we are implementing a law called the Sustainable Groundwater Management, which seeks to fix this historical wrong. Now agencies all across the state are realizing that some savings accounts have been running significantly in excess of what is sustainable. It is my opinion that this single good winter will not be enough to correct it. We've been pulling from our savings account for decades in a huge deficit, and it will take years of positive input to make up for it. Now, the physics gets complicated here because some places can't just fill up again, but others, maybe, could. They lost so much water that the aquifer lost storage capacity, specific storage over, and it is never coming. I am a licensed, professional geologist in the state of and have worked on hydrogeology projects for the past 10 years. In the past few years my specialization has become water management under the Sustainable Groundwater Management 1. Added hyperlinks.
Not really, it's mostly falling in the wrong place to replenish Lake Meade. And even if it were in the right spot, it's hard to communicate the enormity of Lake Meade, and the volume of water that's missing. It would take about a half a year of Niagara Falls to fill Lake Meade back up to the top. Or about 2 years of the Colorado River if we didn't use a single drop of the water and kept every single ounce in the lake. Or about 50 years with the proposed savings that every state has accepted, and California keeps rejecting. The Colorado River Basin is America's Ural Sea. A massive, slow-moving environmental disaster in the making that there's just no political willpower to stop. There's no natural fix. It purely relies on politicians not be corrupt, so good luck.
They were depleting groundwater to the point that 400 feet wells were required to hit water. No matter how much water they get, it will take more than 50 years to replace water aquifers underground. It takes that long to perk through the ground.
Do you have any details on the Central Valley flood plans? That is really interesting.
Great resources, thank you. And kudos to California's data transparency and accessibility.
It's more complicated than that, though. Depleted aquifers can suffer collapse as ground settles without water underneath to support it. That capacity is lost, not like the aquifer is a big rubber bladder that can always re-expand to 100% of original capacity.
Though Lake Meade won't benefit directly, Arizona is doing quite well with all of the snow and rain this winter. 5x snowmass and rain in the high country versus average. There's talk of making a nearby dam higher to hold more water, and parts of Sedona are currently under flood watch. They had to dump water from a reservoir east of Phoenix this week so it wouldn't overflow. The less we need, the more can be held in reserve at.
The statewide reservoir levels just crossed 100% of historical average yesterday, which is absolutely stunning given that we're coming off of 4 straight years of drought.
You'd probably be hearing of floods in southern Utah and northern Arizona. Flood warnings for the river as of this second.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a plan yet. Edit. Yes, there is. Read the reply from you, Gigglesworthy. But some ideas have been proposed and farmers are testing it. I like about all this is that the state, the farmers, and the rest of the public often end up at loggerheads about water. If they flood these areas when there's more water than anyone knows what to do with, it won't be nearly as scarce when there's a drought. It's also probably better for the environment as a whole, because it's what used to happen naturally. I'd imagine native birds, animals, and insects would benefit. This could be a situation where everyone benefits.
I'm out of my depth, but I thought the majority of groundwater was stored in permeable rock. Update. Mostly correct, i.e. that wouldn't collapse. Update. Mostly incorrect. I know about the satellite footage showing collapse of soil during that 2011 to 2017 drought, but I was under the impression that was only a bit of ground storage capacity.
The Salt River watershed is doing quite, which is helpful as the Salt River is one of the 3 sources of water for Phoenix, along with groundwater and cap water from the Grand Canyon.
It's been more than 4 years, no? I moved here in 2013 and we were in drought back then.
Thank you. This is really interesting. The long-term effect of doing this over say 5 years could have some amazing results.
The valley is sinking due to groundwater depletion.
Mexico City is a good example of what happens when you deplete the water reserves. The whole area under the city was a lake before colonization and mining. It's been sinking a long time.
Tangentially related, but this is how most oil is stored underground. It's more like a sponge made out of rock than the typical black pool of oil people picture.
It's called subsidence. The Central Valley has sunk in elevation by more than 72 feet since we began pumping groundwater. Groundwater is stored in the interstitial space in saturated soils, and can be separated into different aquifers by impermeable rock. The highest layers would be called unconfined aquifers and would be easily accessible with a well. Drill through the first layer of bedrock and you reach confined aquifers. These can be pressurized, and are usually pretty deep. We have pumped the water from the Central Valley so much that the space taken up by the water content of the soils in the highest aquifer, the unconfined aquifer, has been filled by dry soils as the soils settle. When you drive the 5 through the Central Valley, that used to be 72 feet higher.
Here's an article from Science magazine with some more.
Well, if they plant the right crops they won't be damaged by flooding during the winter. Either because they can survive the flooding or because they only get sown after the water has left. Might necessitate a change, but not having water during summer is worse than changing what and when you are planting.
Not to excuse what the colonizers did, but the Aztecs seriously modified the hydrology of the Mexico Valley themselves. There never should have been cities there in the first place. They just kept getting flooded out because they weren't quite as ruthless at beating nature down as the colonizers were.
What's more, since oil is typically lighter than water, if groundwater seeps into the source rock, the oil rises above it, leading to oil seeps on the surface, which can gradually turn into tar pits as the lighter hydrocarbons evaporate. Reason why all oil deposits don't turn into tar pits is because oftentimes the permeable source rock is topped with a layer of less permeable caprock, which tends to keep the oil from rising up and water from getting in.